So the big question is this. How entrepreneurs like us who have been breaking with old beliefs, like the idea of holding a 9-to-5 job and living paycheck to paycheck, taking a lifetime to reach business and life success as the only option we have? How do we grow our business in a way that lets us highly service our customers, getting our products and services and the things that we believe in out into the world without diluting our life but enhancing it and taking the journey of internal and external growth? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answer. Your host is Marina Simon, and welcome to 10 Exit. Life and business as usual? Never again.
So today it's a different kind of chapter that you normally will hear from me. And I am taking, for the fun of it, and truly because it's really, really rewarding, as our story as human beings, right? And so I'm taking this religions course. Who was going to think about that in my life, guys? I am Mexican, was raised Catholic. My mom switched to another religion, and I was a little bit there. And, but I really always was looking more for philosophy, or we will say religious in the term of the East, which is a religious philosophy more than a religious practice, right? So I got into this story, which is fascinating, and really, I didn't have 90% of what I've learned on this cycle, and I wanted to share something with you because I find it fascinating where we're at as civilization today. So I'm just going to give you like a fast rundown and summary of the religions, in our planet. So we started with the belief, right, that man is a spiritual being and has a body and it started since Zoroastrianism. In fact, it started with the Vedas 10,000 years ago, right? They wrote these hymns, which were religious hymns. And that's the only things that rest on those times. And it's written in Sanskrit, which is a language used very, very long time ago, 10,000 years ago. So the Vedas had really the essence of truth and who we are as spiritual beings. Now, the East, there's an idea, right? It's not that the East is more spiritual than the West and the West is more practical or materialistic. Truly, what is the idea is at some point in time in this planet, the population divided in two. Some went to the northeast and some went into the west. Now the northeast or east will be Asia, all that area of Russia, all the east area of your planet. And where is very, very rough winters, dry climate, little, vegetation or games. And the West has lots, and I'm talking about the Americas and all the west part of Europe, right? So they had it great because there was a lot of vegetation, a lot of game. They didn't have to struggle. They didn't have to struggle to survive. Now, what I'm doing is just paraphrasing, really the story that I've been learning through reading all these books. So then the population of the earth divided into two ways, right? The guys that went into the East needed to be tough guys, really needed to be tough because survival wasn't that easy. They had to fight to live and they wouldn't die so easily. On the West, life was easier, right? Life was very practical. It was the rule of the strong, right? I can kill, I can do the game, I can feed the group. I'm strong, we're done, right? The East had to struggle. There was no water, guys. There was barely any vegetation, barely any animals. So people really need to be very, very strategic about how to live life and survive. And they were very endurant. So they had more time to really think and look at ways that were very keys on how to keep themselves alive. This turned into a very interesting way of living, which was more intellectual than the West. The West was more force, more practical, get it done. Nothing wrong with one or the other, but a combination of both would have been ideal. So now, the East had the opportunity then to write and register the historic events of things. That doesn't mean that the West is too young. It means that we didn't register anything, so we think it's not young enough, right? We think they're the Indians and that's it, right? Not necessarily. But it wasn't registered. The only registers we had are from the East, and they came through trading until those materials arrived to West. Why? Not because the East is older, but because they registered their story and their history. I'm telling you, the Vedas are 10,000 years ago. We don't have anything like that on the West because it was not registered. So that's the basic story, how the East, and you're going to follow up with me, how the East has more time to think and be more spiritual than physical. The West is more practical, more physical, more materialistic, more let's get it done, right? The East can think until they fall dead, and the West is practical, okay? So now, the beginning of the religions, right? So you have Zoroastrianism, which is all these Eastern religions that I'm going to tell you is basically they're based on spirituality. Man is composed of spirit, body, and mind, right? And basically what they were trying to break was that constant cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. They wanted to free the spirit of that cycle. That was the basics of these guys in the East. The West didn't register anything yet. So Zoroastrianism, right? It was more the spiritual, more godliness, and they were, they were defining the difference between good and evil. Then Jainism came after, and they were perfecting the human nature, and they believe on freeing the soul. But everything is based on spirituality, if you see. Then Taoism at the same time came, which addressed the naturalness in life, right? But again, it was very spiritual. Tao means the way to break that cycle between birth, death, and rebirth, right? And then coming back, what some people call transcendentalism and some others reincarnation, etc. Now, just for the fun of it, the difference between transcendentalism and reincarnation is just that reincarnation, they will consider that man will come back to man's body, right? I mean, human body. And transcendentalism is more Eastern, and it's like, okay, they can come back in a dog body, or you have India, who believes in this. Okay, then after Taoism came Buddhism, which was basically enlightenment, transcending life, right? It was very spiritual, and it came from a religion called the Dharma, which is basically knowing how to know is knowledge, right? And funny enough, they thought that Dharma was discovered by Buddha, but it was not. The religion existed before. So all these guys are on the East. Now you're going to the West, right? There's still some threads of spirituality. Christianism comes. And of course, there's emphasis in the spirit. But now we turn from an eternal spiritual being to a one lifetime being, but still keeping the threads of spirituality, right? However, in the 1800s, atomism, by the way, let me back off a little bit. I'm going to talk about materialism now, after talking to spiritualism, right? So there was this belief since the 1600s before Christ by the Egyptians that men came from a sea of ammonia, literally. Then the Greeks came, and a philosopher called Thales, 625 before Christ, same cycle, right? Material things, man is just bad material. 1500s before Christ, Anaximander comes, which is a disciple of Thales, that man came from man. Right? This is 2500 years before Darwin. The evolutionary, I lost my track. Then Lysippus and Democritus, which were Greek also, they believe on atomism. Now, what is atomism, Marina? It's the belief that everything comes from these very small particles called the atoms that are undivisible. In those times, they thought it was indivisible, but man and the spirit came from the atoms, right? That's 400 before Christ. Then Epicurus and Lucretius, right, comes in, Greek, of course, 300 before Christ, and basically, again, the spirit is made out of atoms, right? Then on the 19th century, 1800s, let me see, physics. Physics is the study of the mind. In the early 1800s, physics was still considering the study of the mind because it considers that time and space were mental phenomena, not just physical, right? So they were already considering the spirit. Now, I told you about all these religions, Christianism, but it wasn't until 1800, after Christ, that atomism again rebirth, right, comes back again. Like the materialistic. What I'm trying to differentiate here is our history as spiritual beings and our history from the viewpoint that we're material beings. There's no spirit, it's only matter, energy, space, and time. Now, this theory of atomism comes again in 1800s with Pierre Gassendi and Thomas Hobbes, right? Again, atomism, but they still kind of married with the Christian, with Christianity. Then in 1700s, Denis Diderot, that the spirit develops from material functions. Then that opens the door to the Industrial Revolution, right? And the dualism, which it talks about body and spirit. Okay, so now, as you can see, 1800s, nobody has made a bridge between the spirit and material world. Either it's a spiritual or it's material, but there's no bridge combining both. Now, in the 1800s, Frederick Wilhelm III, which is a king of Prussia, created the University of Berlin, and he created the philosophy department, and he called it a weapon of war. And he started cooking the German nationalism, right? That afterwards developed into the Superman and, the creation of the Nazis. Now, Charles Darwin, right? He has the theory of evolution that is different than the spiritual, source of life. Is the survivors of the fittest. So it's a materialistic crusade, right? Man is just force. It's just material universe. Then it comes in the early 1900s and late 1800s, Ernst Haeckel, right, which is a zoologist, and he creates eugenics, which started really what Hitler was developing, right? The purity of a race. Then Herbert Spencer was an evolutionary and a social Darwinism. I'm telling you the story and the basis of what happened in Germany in 1940s. Then we have a military and an industrial boom, which Christianity will not have justified, but Darwinism could, right? Now we're going to give a lot of strength to the military. Okay, now we come with Friedrich Nietzsche in the 1800s, which is basically pure materialistic and the fittest to survive. Strength, force is the ultimate virtue. If you're weak, you're a sucker, right? The super race, Superman, and that's where he wrote Thus Spoke Zarathustra, justifying there was no spirituality behind man. Then come Karl Marx, right, which was a philosopher. And then there comes Friedrich Engels, which was a social scientist. So these guys created what is called dialectic materialism, right, which basically you have political and historical events result of social conflict. So contradictions create the solution, right? The conflict caused by materialistic needs. So that's your basis of communism, guys. Communism. So ideas come from collusion of force, right? So force is Mr. Force, so important. There's no spirituality. There's not thought or rationality. Then psychology comes about. Originally was the study of the spirit, and that's basically what your old dictionary says. Is a study of the mind, analysis of the mind or spirit. But then they redefine the word to fit the materialistic purpose, denying the existence of the spirit. And I'm talking about psychology. Then Mr. Wilhelm Wundt in 1873 comes, which is the father of modern psychology. All is matter. There's no spirituality. Man is an animal. And then we have the rise of experimental psychology, which we have rats and frogs being studied to find out how man behaves. Then comes Sigmund Freud in 1800s, 1900s, which he was an Austrian neurologist, which we consider the father of psychoanalysis, right? But basically the soul psyche, man, is banished from the role of religion, and it was totally stole. Forget there was no spirituality, right? Treatment replaced religious counseling. Drugs becomes the new sacrament. Authoritarian new priesthood of psychiatrists arise as messiahs of a bogus science. Right now we have the adjustment to hard environments instead of the creation of one. Wundt says man is not a spirit but an animal. His life is devoid of meaning. What do you think Wundt's story helps to? Warmongers, guys, to create war. And this closed the chapter of man's spirituality. Can you see where we're standing today? Just recently, I saw there was a film for kids, a cartoon. And it was no more even you go to hell or heaven and you're a spiritual being. No. This cartoon, and I forgot the name, was that everything is just material. You bump, take a body, and there's no spirituality considered. So I just want to make this chapter for you to see where we're at as a civilization. Is man just a pure animal, a body? Is everything just neurons and a brain? Or is man a spiritual being with high altitude, with no limits of creation, with high integrity and high ethics? That is the question.
Thanks for joining us today on 10 Exit. Life and business as usual, never again. We love always hearing from you. Please feel free to send Marina an email, marina@marinasimonbrand.com. Your input and comments are always welcome, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And if you like the podcast, you can always subscribe to it. Remember, the best way to predict the future is to create it.